So first step, whenever you are bezel setting, that is what we are calling this stone setting. It is a piece of metal, like a flat sheet of metal, that is wrapped around a stone that's flat on the bottom and round on the top. You can also bezel set faceted stones, but that's a whole different process. So this box bezel is for cabochon stones, like the ones that I've purchased. So today, I have a little circle stone, and then I have a glass stone that I made that is some of these larger pieces here. So I'm going to show you today just the first part, making the setting. That's all we're going to talk about today. I'm not going to talk to you about the last parts where you are folding the setting over the stone, because that's just going to take a ton of time. And I want you to be able to work a little bit today, and I want to be able to show the people who are molding how to do that. Alright, so I have prepped some of our little pieces here, but I want to show you how to get to that point. So the first thing that you're going to use is this copper bezel wire. Okay, it is really thin, flat sheet of copper. Cut off about the amount that you're going to need. So think about the size of your stone that you are setting. I have the other stones in here if you want to take a look at them. And then cut off a piece that is the thickness that you want. The next thing that you're going to have to do is consider the height of the stone. The height of most of these stones is very short. So you are not going to need a tall seat or a tall setting. So you're just going to cut it down with a pair of scissors. So what you're looking for, those of you who are farther away, you might want to scoot in a little bit. You have this stone, and then there's this part of the stone that's like kind of, sort of, almost flat-ish, and then there's the sharp curve of the stone. You do not want your setting to go up very high, or else you're going to lose a lot of the visual of your stone. So you just need your setting to get to the point where it's tall enough that there's a little gap that you're pushing down onto the stone. If you have it too high, your setting's going to be up here. If you have it lower, your setting is going to be lower, and you'll see more of your stone. Now there will get to a point where it's too low, but at this point in your jewelry careers, I think most of you are going to err on the side of it being too high. So that's something that you'll just want to keep an eye out for. Once you have that done, you're going to need to check the size of the stone with the circle that you are creating. Now I had found that this stone is about as thick as the round part of this center punch. So instead of wrapping it around the stone, I'm going to wrap it around something that's a little bit harder. I'm going to wrap it around the center punch. I also have, for the oval stones, an oval mandrel. I have a circle mandrel too, but it's too big. The top part is too big for these stones, these little teeny tiny ones. I'll put that out there so it's a little bit easier to see. So you're going to wrap your bezel wire around something that's about the same size as your stone. And then you're looking for a good fit. A good fit means that there is a tiny, teeny amount of gapping. Teeny, teeny, tiny. So if you're looking at your stone, you want just enough gapping that you can pull the stone out or pull the setting off of the stone without having too much gapping. If it wiggles a lot, then you're going to have a hard time setting your stone. So I'm going to push this in a little bit. This is the hardest part, is getting your setting right. And it's better to take a longer period of time to get your setting right than it is to just, I'm gonna go with it and see what happens. Okay, that's a problem, because then you wasted all this time soldering and then your stone doesn't fit. So now I have one that is about the correct size, so I'm going to mark it with a marker where the two edges of my flat bezel wire are going to meet. Just like we talked about with jump rings, you need a really good connection for your bezel wire to solder. So I'm going to cut this, erring on the side of a little too much, because I can always file it down. Come on. These scissors are not the best. Those are even worse. Thanks though. I appreciate you trying. It's not cutting there at all. Okay, these scissors are awful. There we go. Alright, so I bent my bezel out really far. At this point, it doesn't really matter too much, because I can always bend it back into shape after it's soldered. So what I need to do now is take my pliers, whether it's round nose pliers from the cabinet or the flat nose pliers in your kit, and make sure that there is a good fit between your two wires. So this piece here is fitting like this. One side is jutting right up to the other side. If I don't have that good fit, when I put my piece of solder underneath that seam, it is not going to flow up through that opening. If there is an opening, that solder is going to have no place to go. It will not fill this. It's not like solder for stained glass. It won't fill. It'll just sit there in a little ball in your gap, in your opening. Or it'll fuse to the metal. So I'm going to pass this around. This is the one that I have finished. You can see where the little gap is that it didn't fill. While you're passing that around, I am going to get this next part set up. So I'm going to skip that one, and we're going to work with one of the bezels that has already been fluxed and the wires match perfectly. Whenever you are using solder for your bezels, you always want to use hard solder to solder your bezel together. And what I'm going to show you right now is a process called Pic Soldering. So I have a lot of pieces of hard solder right here on my block. And I am going to turn my torch on. Yep, fire. Get everything out of the way that could burn.
Get out of the way.
Lauren, I think you're okay. And I'm going to use my pick, and what will happen is I'm going to melt a couple of pieces of solder onto the end of my pick, and then use that to solder my piece. So I could have this on the top and really control exactly when it melts, or I could put a piece of solder, just like I did in the drawing, underneath my seam. Now I'm going to heat this up, touching the pick to the top of the seam. It releases that solder, and now that piece has soldered like the other one. But since my seam was better, it filled the entire seam. So now where does this go?
Pickle.
In the pickle. And when it comes out, I just reform it to fit my stone, and then you move on to the next step, which is soldering your cleaned piece to whatever you want it on. So I'm going to take my clean piece, put it on my flux piece. Actually, I should flux this. I have to be careful since I have a lot of solder on here. That's hard solder. I'm not going to be using hard solder because it'll open up the seam of my bezel. I'm going to be using medium solder. I want a good fit, so I want to make sure that the bezel is directly touching the entire sheet of metal. And just like in the diagram that you have on your handout that I gave you, you want to use solder and place it inside your bezel. If you put it on the outside, then you run the risk of your solder melting on the sheet and not connecting the bezel to your sheet. So I'm going to take a couple of pieces. That's too many. Drop them on the inside and use my pick to help move them around. So there's not very many pieces in your picture. What I like to do is have a piece and then a gap that's about maybe a little bit wider than a piece of solder, and then another piece. This is the hard part about soldering your bezels down, is getting your solder in place properly. Okay, so that's in place. Now what I'm going to do is heat up the sheet, not the bezel. Because the sheet has more metal, it's going to take longer to heat up. If I heat the bezel, all of the solder is going to jump to the bezel and not adhere to the sheet. So I'm going to work my way around the sheet. The bezel will heat up because it's small. And I'm working with medium solder, so it will melt at a lower temperature than the hard solder that is holding the bezel closed. My flux has cleared, so my solder should go in just a little bit. And once I see my solder flow, I am going to make sure that it flows all the way around the ring before I stop heating the piece. All right, here it goes. Around the ring. You see a silver line go around the bottom of the ring, and that's done. Where does this go?
Pickle.
In the pickle. Once it comes out, what I normally do is file and sand at the top of the bezel so that it's the perfect height. I drill a hole through the center, so if I would have any problems, I could pop the stone back out and unset the stone, and then I set the stone. Okay, but that's a whole nother demo that'll come after.